Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my photography masterclass. And if you haven't figured it out from my lower third, my name's Terry White. I'm the photography evangelist here at Adobe. It's my pleasure to be streaming to you all live once again on a Friday morning, at least my time. Let's just get a couple windows open here to make sure I can see the chat. And I can. I see a bunch of people already in the official Behance chat, which is where you should be. And I see some folks joining me on other platforms. And as we always like to say, you can watch on any platform you happen to see this on, but you're better to watch it on Adobe Live on Behance. The reason is, hang on one second, let me just mute. There we go. The reason is because that's where I'm paying attention to the chat. So if you want to ask questions, if you want to just talk, if you want to see everyone else that's watching, head over to b.net/Adobe Live, and that's where the official chat is. So, but if you're hanging out on Facebook, if you're hanging out on Twitter, if you're hanging out on YouTube, that's cool, but it's better to hang out on b.net/Adobe Live. So I see Paul Lee, I see Paul Traney, I see Tim, Fred, Aditya, Sean, Bram, Victoria, Ray, and let's see, did I miss anybody? And some other people that scrolled by, but welcome everyone. J.R. Flores, welcome everyone. And again, thanks for being here live with me on this beautiful Friday morning, at least here in Atlanta. I know some people are all the way in India, so good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you happen to be. Today's topic is going to be mobile. So we're just going to do everything on mobile, unless you have a specific question that I have to show something on a desktop. We're going to try and keep it all on mobile for the next 52 minutes. So that means we're going to use Lightroom and Photoshop on iPad. I'm going to show something on my phone that a lot of people still don't realize you can do, where we maybe even get into some Lightroom camera shooting. We're just going to go ahead and just do as much as we can on mobile and get going today. I see Mark Heaps joining all the way on from Texas on Facebook. Mark, as you know, it's b.net/Adobe Live to participate in the chat. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to switch over to my iPad view. There's my iPad sitting there ready to go, and I've got Lightroom and Photoshop on it. So let me go to my Adobe folder. Here's my Adobe folder with all my beautiful Adobe apps and Lightroom and Photoshop at the top there. We're going to start off in Lightroom, and we're going to start off even where we normally don't start off. We're going to import some images into Lightroom on mobile because, again, I think this is important. A lot of people don't realize they think that they have to go home, import their raw files from their DSLR or their mirrorless into Lightroom on the desktop, and then sync it, and then they can get to mobile. And that workflow has been around for years, and that's the way you used to have to do it. But you can now just stay out in the field. You don't have to come home first. You don't have to go back to your hotel room first, back when you were staying in hotels. You don't have to do any of that. You can do it all on mobile. So I've got a memory card right here. And you might think, well, how am I going to get this physical memory card into that iPad? Well, right now, I've got that iPad connected to the streaming system so you guys can see it. And hey, Mark, glad you made it over. I've got that iPad sitting there so you guys can see it in the streaming system. And the way I'm doing that is I've got it connected to a dock like this. So on this dock is HDMI out, and that's how I'm getting to the streaming system. And it's even got Ethernet on it, so I get some nice fast speed. But on the other side of this dock, you'll notice that it's got card readers. It's even got USB ports, but it's got card readers right here. So if I were using this dock, I would just plug my card in just like that, and the iPad can see it. So this is I'm using an iPad Pro, so the iPad Pro has USB-C. Now, if you don't have an iPad Pro, let's say you have an older iPad or just not a Pro version, or with the new one with USB-C, Apple makes a card reader that uses Lightning. So it has a Lightning connector on it. We're going to see that in a special way in just a minute. But so using just standard, this is not Apple. This is some company called Veva, I think. But anyway, this is just a standard USB-C dock that has card readers built in. And even if it didn't have the card readers built in, it's got a USB port to plug in another kind of card reader. So for example, my mirrorless, yep, Tim, I know that I need to work on that. But anyway, my mirrorless camera uses X or QXD cards. And this is a QXD card reader that just has standard USB. So I can even plug this in if I had to. And they make these for USB-C, so I don't have to do this weird thing. But if I had to use this card reader, I could even plug this one in to the dock to get those cards as well. But since I am going to use a standard SD card, we'll take it out of the dock that's not connected to anything. We'll put it into the dock that is connected to the iPad. And now that that is connected to the iPad, and you're saying, well, nothing happened. That's right, because we haven't told it to do anything yet. So let's go ahead and pop over into Lightroom. And in Lightroom, I've got a brand new folder. I just created a new folder in Lightroom called Photography Masterclass that I'm going to now create albums in for these masterclasses. So they're not all over the place. I can get to them easily. So let's go to this folder. And here are some of the ones we've already done. I'm just going to create a brand new album. You might recognize this name because we used it last week, Wine and Cheese. So if you were with me last week, or if you go back and watch that replay, if you're watching this replay, you can go back and see we did a product shoot live. So I did a live product shoot, mirrorless camera, showing camera settings, showing the lighting, so forth and so on. I brought those images into a separate computer, into an HP, into Lightroom Classic, not my normal catalog, none of that. And I thought, well, I could bring them in off camera, but I decided to go ahead and bring them in now. So let's go ahead and do that. We're in that album right now, and you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner that I have the import buttons. So I have the, well, not import, but the add button. So I've got the camera button on the bottom right. That's if I want to shoot directly. And I've got the button on the bottom left to the right, or to the right, but it's the first button, and that's your add. So you'll notice that it says from all photos, which means those are the ones that are already in Lightroom that you want to just add to this album. You've got from camera roll, which means these are images that are on your Apple or your device camera roll if you're using another device. You got from files, because now Apple supports a file system, so it has a files app. We're going to be using that in just a second. And then you got from camera device. And I was like puzzled because this is grayed out. This is what I want. I want to get them from that card. I want to get them from that device. And I noticed that sometimes when I'm using a dock and a card reader and blah, 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 it doesn't always recognize it as a device. So that's great. I'm like, oh man, I can't bring those images in. I don't have a card reader that's working the right way. And then I figured out a way around it. So if for whatever reason you plug something in and it's not showing up as a device, that bottom choice is grayed out like it is on mine. A real world example of how to get around it. So instead of going to that, which you can't, let's go to From Files. And when I go to From Files, you'll notice it just brings up all my folders. But if I go to Locations, look at that Nikon D850 down there. That's the name of the card, by the way. It sees it. So it sees that it's there. It knows it's there, but it just didn't bring it in as a device. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap on it. And there's my DCIM folder, ready to go, just like it would normally be. And I think they're in this folder, and there they are. So there are all my images from last week's shoot that I can just select one by one, or I can hit select one by one, or I can, now that I've hit select in the upper right-hand corner, I can go ahead and select all. So if I select all, and then I tap open, that will start to bring in those files. So, hey, Scott Kelby. Yes, it's Tiny Terry. Scott Kelby's in the house. Mark Heaps is in the house. So just some celebrities here. Victoria's in the house. All these instructors are here watching me. I saw Paul Tranny earlier. Tim Mobeast, of course, is our moderator. So it's great to see all these folks here. But anyway, now that I've got the ability to import those in, I can just go ahead and open. Now, again, you don't have to do all of them. And I probably shouldn't do all of them for this demo, but I'm going to go ahead and risk it. because it's like 64 raw files. And that was the other point I was going to make, is that they don't have to be raw. I shoot in raw, but they could have been JPEGs. They could have been whatever your camera shoots, which is usually going to be JPEG or raw. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit tap open. And I could be talking while it's doing that. So it takes a second to start bringing those in, but once it does, you'll start to see them appear in that album. Now, if you're impatient and you don't want to, like, is it really doing it? Is it doing anything? Because I was like that too. Is it really doing anything? You can go out of this, and go back to your recently added, and your recently added will start showing them there too. So this is where I normally double, triple check to make sure it's actually doing anything. And it hasn't started yet, but they should start appearing there in just a second. And if not, I'm going to go back and try it again. Oh man, live demos, love it. Okay, let's go do it again. Let's go back to my demo folder. Let's go back to my photography, my wine and cheese. All right, let's not try and bring in all of them. Let's bring in a couple of them just to make sure this process works. All right, so from files, there they are, select. And I won't try and do all 64 this time. I'm just going to go grab a few of the last ones we did of that shoot and a few of the last ones we did of the other shoot. Yeah, this shoot. Here we go. So let's just grab a few of these and let's go ahead and tap open again. Let's see what happens. Oh, see, it did it. There they are. They were all coming in. I just wasn't patient. So you got to wait a second. So it's already brought in 25 of them. It was working. I just was impatient. So here they all 64 are now coming in. So give it a second is the lesson learned here. So they're all coming in, 35, 37. And again, it's bringing those raw files right into that album that I created called Wine and Cheese. So embarrassing that I just didn't give it time. It was working. And here we go. It's bringing them all in. And we just have a few more to go. 51, 53, 54, 56, 58. Oh, a few more. 60, 62, a couple more. That should be it. Okay, 63 imported and it skipped 6 duplicates. That was me trying to tell it a second time. So it even remembered my second request. Now at that point, there isn't like on your desktop where you would hit eject card or you would tell it some weird way to get your card out. You can just unplug it because it's doing it a safe way. So when you unplug it, you're ready to go. Okay, so those images are there. They're in Lightroom. They're now syncing to the cloud. So I can see the sync icon going in the upper right-hand corner. That will happen. Let's say you're out in the field and you don't have an internet connection. Yes, embarrassing Terry mistake is now trending on Twitter. It wasn't really a mistake. It was just, I was just not patient. But anyway, I did do it the right way. So embarrassingly impatient Terry should be trending on Twitter. All right. Anyway, with that said, what was I going to say? If you didn't have an internet connection, let's say you're out in the middle of the woods and you don't have that connection, then would it still work? Absolutely. They would just be on your iPad, sitting on the device, waiting until you do have an internet connection. Once you have an internet connection, like I do now, then they will start syncing up to the cloud and backing themselves up. So that's another advantage of doing this in Lightroom on mobile is that you're getting that backup right now. So it's syncing them and they will not only be on the card still, they'll be on my iPad, second copy, and they'll be in the cloud, third copy. And of course, ultimately, they will remove themselves off the iPad to save space once you're not using them anymore. That's the right hashtag, Scott. Thank you. All right. So now that I've got these images here, and again, that syncing is not something you have to wait for. It's something that happens in the background. You can start working right away. All right. So for example, let's say I want to take that last shot because that was, I think, our final shot that we liked. Because if I remember, there was a shot that was towards the end, maybe not. There was like a little leaf sticking out. I think towards the end, maybe not. But anyway, that we didn't want to use that one. But this is the shot. This was the one we finished. This was the last one. But we didn't do anything to it. We just shot it directly with the camera settings we had, and this is what we got. So now that I got it in Lightroom, I can actually start doing some work on it. So for example, one of the first things I like to do is correct geometry, or I'm sorry, my optics, if it were shot with a DSLR. In other words, I would go into my optics and I would enable lens correction. But lens correction on mirrorless cameras happens in the body. So if I do this, probably you won't see any difference. And you didn't see any difference because it was already lens corrected in the mirrorless body. So if you're shooting mirrorless, that's just one less thing you usually have to do. Now that I've done that, I'll go to auto at the very top to do an auto, just an auto adjustment. So auto tone. So if I go to light now, we can see in light that it moved all those sliders. So it gave me, increased my shadows or brightened my shadows up. It decreased my highlights, brightened the exposure a little bit. It brought the blacks down a little bit. And I actually, this is one of those rare examples of when auto just, yeah, I like it. It did all the things I would want to do. All right, next thing we want to do is we want to go into, actually we'll go to color next. Let's go to color. And it did bump up the vibrance and the saturation. Now, typically, I don't like it when it messes with saturation if I'm working on a portrait. So I usually reset that back to 0. But since this is not a portrait, I don't mind that it bumped up the saturation as well. And we can also bump up the vibrance a little bit more, just because I like things to be nice and vibrant. Not crazy vibrant, just nice and vibrant. And also because this is not a person, we can go into detail. Not only do we want to make sure it's sharpened, which we would do that. We don't need the masking in this case, but we really can go into effects and mess with texture and clarity. Typically things I don't do in terms of portraits as much, but since this is not a portrait, I can go crazy with texture. I can go crazy with even clarity if I want, but remember that clarity is also going to adjust your tones. So I don't want to necessarily do clarity in this case, but I do want to just bump up that texture to make this image nice and crisp and sharp as we can see. So I can zoom in, make sure that it's in focus, make sure that it looks good, and that's the shot that I really like. Okay, so we can keep doing all these Lightroom things to it, and we would, but the whole point of this is that if we were really in a workflow on our desktop and we did all these things, but we wanted to add something to the photo that Lightroom doesn't do, we would make our way over to Photoshop. Because in Photoshop, we could add text, we could add layers, we could add adjustment layers, we could do all kinds of things in Photoshop. We could clone, we can remove objects easier or remove distractions easier. We can do all these things. But in Lightroom, those things are either not possible or very hard to do. So like in terms of removing things, you only have that one spot removal tool or healing brush that's not as good as the one in Photoshop. So here, as of the June update, I was just trying to remember when we released this. As of the June update, now in Lightroom, you have the ability, when you go to the share menu, you notice it says edit in Photoshop is now one of my choices. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I was very happy with this shot. And again, I have to give a shout out to Victoria for styling the shoot, for giving me all the items to place and to put in place. All right, so let's go ahead and hit tap, edit in Photoshop, brand new option in Lightroom on iPad. And when I choose edit in Photoshop, it's rendering out an image that Photoshop can open. So it's because Photoshop, anyway, because that was a raw file, it's having to do that. So where's my image? It opened Photoshop, but it didn't actually open my image. Let me try it again. Stuff that happens live. That doesn't happen when you do this a million times before you go live. Here we go. All right, so now it's opening. I don't know if that was just I wasn't being patient. In that case, I think it just didn't happen. So we need be patient, Terry, to trend on Twitter. So it's giving me the what's new in Photoshop. I'm going to skip the tour. And you notice in the upper left corner, there's a big button that says Send to Lightroom. So in other words, just like the workflow on desktop, you start in Lightroom, you get it adjusted the way you want, take it over to Photoshop to do things you can't do in Lightroom. Then when you're done, save it and close it and come back. It creates a copy in Lightroom from your raw file with all the layers and everything you did in Photoshop. Same process here. So what would I come over to Photoshop for? Like I said, the things I can't do in Lightroom. I can't add text in Lightroom. I can't add, I can't clone. I can't duplicate. I can't add layers. I can't do any of that stuff. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and first of all, let's add some text. So I'm going to hit my type tool. I'm going to type the word wine. Now we're going to do wine and cheese, but I'm going to type the word wine first. Then I'm going to select all and just increase the point size a bit. And now I want to change the font, but here's the problem. The font that I want to use, which if you know me, you know I'm a fan when it comes to scripts of Bickham Script Pro, and Bickham Script Pro is not in my list. I want to use Bickham Script Pro, but it's not here. So, and I did that on purpose because I use that font all the time. This is to show you if you need a font from Adobe Fonts that doesn't happen to be in Photoshop in that moment, there's a way to go get that font. Currently, you don't do it in Photoshop. You go do it in the Creative Cloud app. So let's get out of Lightroom out of Photoshop for a minute. Let's go to the Creative Cloud app. In the Creative Cloud app, let me back out of this to show you where I was. You'll normally end up in your work. So in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm sorry, not the bottom right-hand corner, but the bottom of the screen, there's a Fonts button. So if you tap Fonts, that will show you all your fonts. That will show you, which is my favorite category, active fonts, but not on this device. Active fonts, not on this device, meaning fonts you've used on the desktop that are not currently on your iPad. That's what I need. I need a font that I've used all the time, but is not currently here. Now you can go look at all the other fonts you want, but in this case, I'm looking for a very specific font that I use called, go up to the B's, there it is, Bickham Script Pro. So I'm going to tap the little cloud icon, sync with my computer, let me actually go into it. And let me go ahead and, okay, so you can add each instance of it. I'm just going to add the regular. So it's now giving me the ability to install that font on my iPad. And there it is, it's done. And I could add the semi-bold if I needed that one too. And I could add the bold if I needed that one too. So I can add as many styles of that family as I want. So now that I've got the little green check mark next to each font, it's letting me know, hey, you've now got those fonts on your iPad, not only to use in Photoshop, but to use in any app that lets you use beyond the installed fonts, beyond the ones that just come with your iPad. So I can go back to Photoshop, and Photoshop said, I'm leaving this. I don't know what you're doing. You know what? It's because I didn't accept the type, but now I've lost my back and forth workflow. So I'm going to actually close this for a second. I'm going to go back to Lightroom because remember, I want to use this image and come back. So let's send it over to Photoshop again. Normally you wouldn't have to do that, but because I added that font after the fact, I'm just going to go back and play it safe and bring this back in again. Now it did save it. It's in the cloud. All my changes I would have made would have been there. I never accepted that type, so that's why that's not there. All right, so now let's go do it. Type. There we go. We're going to type the word wine. We're going to hit Command A on the keyboard, and we're going to go ahead and make it bigger. If you didn't have a keyboard, you would just triple tap. We can move it around. We can put it where we want. But then when I go to my fonts, and I go up to my B's, there's my Bickham Script Pro 3. So that's how we add a font. You want to probably do it while you're not doing a send to Lightroom, or send from Lightroom. But typically, that's how you would add a font, and now it's in that font. And I can again, get out of the font choice. I can go bigger. I can get that nice and big. But you notice I'm at the end of the scroll. 288 points. What if I want to go 289 points? What if I want 350 points? Is that all the iPad can do? No. That's all the slider can do. If I tap the number, I get a keyboard. So I can say that I want this to be 350 points exactly. And now I get exactly 350 points. So you don't have to stick with what it gives you. Now that we're there, I also want to change the color because that black type on that brick wall just doesn't do it for me. So I'm going to go ahead and tap color. And I could guess at my colors, but I love to use colors that are already in the image. So let's go do that. I'm going to tap the little eyedropper. Now that I got the little eyedropper, move it around, get the color that I want. And the only thing I don't like about this eyedropper, it's doing a great job of showing me in the top half of the ring what the color is going to be. Great. It doesn't preview it on the type until I let go. Once I let go, though, it says, okay, you picked your color. So if I need to change the color, I got to go back to that. Oh, yeah, I let go. It took long enough. But I let go, and it says, okay, if you want to pick your type color, you've done it now. And if you want, oh, I keep making more type. If you want to change that color, then you got to start the process over again of selecting the type, going back to the color, and changing it. So that would be one thing I wish they would tweak, is that let me stay in that that eyedropper until I'm done, until I tap something to say I'm done with it. All right, just a minor gripe on my part. All right, so now we got the wine in there. Now we're going to type the and cheese. So I'm just going to tap somewhere else. There's my new type. Notice it brought it in the right color and the right font, but I don't want that font. And I don't want that color. But we're going to go ahead and go cheese. And there we go. We're going to move that in place now. And we're going to make that a little bigger. Oh, let's select it first. Command A. There we go. Make it bigger. Bring it down. And you know what? Before I worry about the size, let's go ahead and get the font right. So, because I don't want that font. I want something with a nice serif font. So we'll use something like Baskerville. See, that's why the size isn't relevant, because with that font, it's too big now. So always choose your font before you worry about your size. All right, wine and cheese. And I also want a different color. So I want to just add a little bit more contrast. Let's go to color. Now I could use the eyedropper again and try and sample and get the colors I want, but I'm just going to go ahead and go to the reds and change it to a red. Kind of a brighter reddish pink color, something like that. And there we are. So there's my, I'm not crazy about the color. But anyway, there's my wine and cheese that I'll probably continue to work with. Or maybe, hang on. Maybe if I just change cheese to what I want. Okay, and that's another thing. It's changing all of it. So if I want it, the and to not be that color, I need to separate it out. So let's go ahead and do that. Move that. I know I'm being picky for a masterclass, but hey, that's what masterclasses are. They let the instructor be picky. Hang on, let's get out of that and go here. There we go. And we'll type our and. Oh, wrong keyboard. And. We'll move that over. We'll make that bigger. Select it first, make it bigger. We'll move it in just a second, but let's get the color right. Something like that. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I just didn't like the whole thing being in that red. All right, let's get that just about there. And away we go. Okay, again, all that level of tweaking that, first of all, even doing the type is not possible in Lightroom, let alone doing any of this other stuff. And I've got my 3 typed layers there as a layered file. And Scott's killing me with the hashtags. And what else do I want to show here? Okay, so the other thing, I'm going to go back to the background layer because I noticed just a couple things that are bugging me on the background. That one little string in the front, like the strings on the right don't bother me, but that one little string that's on the front kind of bugs me now that I see it. So going to the background and going to the healing brush and using the Apple Pencil, you can use your finger, but it is so much better with the Apple Pencil, especially when we make the brush bigger. Let's do that. Oh. Get a nice decent sized brush there. And now we're just going to go ahead and brush out part of that string. And again, something that would be a lot harder to do. Lightroom does have a spot removal tool, but it's just not as good as the one in Photoshop. And we'll get rid of its shadow and just take that one little string off. And these little strings that are hanging out down here, we'll take those off as well. Okay. There we go. Now, one other feature that's new inside Photoshop that I often forget, I ran into it by accident just there, is that you can now rotate the canvas. So if you're painting and you need to work at a specific angle that would make it better, I'm rotating the canvas, not the document. So that way you can rotate the canvas, paint, rotate the canvas a different way, paint, without worrying about it tilting or turning the document every single time. All right, so we made our adjustments there. We got that looking the way I want. If I send it back to, am I done? Yeah, I'm gonna send it back to Lightroom now, or at least for now. That will write out a PSD file. So it's not messing with your original raw file. It's making a brand new Photoshop document, writing the PSD format. Then it should take us back to Lightroom, and it just did. And it's now putting that PSD right next to your original in the same album, just like it does on the desktop. So I have my layered file that I can open up back in Photoshop on the iPad or on the desktop and continue working with it. And anything I've done on Photoshop on the iPad is there, all layers, all adjustments. If I duplicated the background before I did that healing, that duplicate would be there. Everything would be there just as if I'd done it on the desktop. And you can even see that it's giving you the icon of PS in the upper right-hand corner, letting you know that that's a Photoshop document as opposed to the one to the right of it, which says raw file. Okay, let's go back to Photoshop, and let me show you one other new thing. One or two more new things that are new in Photoshop. How do I want to do that first? Okay, actually, before we do that, let's do one thing real quick. I said I was going to show you this card reader in a way that we haven't talked about before. Before we do the Photoshop thing, let's go in. I've got my iPad or my phone here. I've got my iPhone here now. And this is a Lightning card reader. And I'm going to go ahead and just take another memory card, not the same one. I'm going to plug the card reader in first. Well, actually, let me show you the phone first. Let's do that. So you can walk through this process with me. Connecting. Oh, yeah, it's connecting. Maybe not. All right, let's quit that app, and the app I use to connect is taking too long. Let's quit it and restart it. Okay, let's try it now. 1 second. There we go. All right, so let's switch over so you can see my phone. There's my phone. Here's the card reader. Just going to plug the card reader in. And I'm going to take the memory card, a different memory card, and plug it into this card reader. So here we go. Just like that. Okay, so now that I've done that, if we go to Lightroom on my phone, it says device connected. Yes, it is. I'm going to hit continue, and I'm going to say that I want to, it's showing me all the images that I took in Iceland. I can even tell it which album to go to, or create an album. Actually, before we do that, let's go to the right album. So we're doing wine and cheese. Let's just put it in there for now. So now we'll go back. We'll say from device. And if I wanted any of these files, even on my iPhone, I've got the ability to import native raw files from a DSLR or from a mirrorless camera or professional camera, whatever way you want to say it. And I can say I want that one and I want that one. So now we'll import those in. It's copying those raw files directly from my card reader. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to disconnect the card reader now. And there are my two photos. It's asking me if I want to view them or not. But there they are, ready to go and ready to edit if I wanted to edit. There's some people down there walking towards the mountain. All right, there we go. So we'll let that sync, because now those will sync up to the cloud as well. And we'll go back to the iPad, and now we'll go back to Photoshop. All right, so we'll let that happen. Let's go back to Photoshop on the iPad, and now let's go ahead and do an import and open. So I'm going to import. Now I'm just doing standard straight up Photoshop. Has nothing to do with Lightroom. So I'm just going to go to Photoshop. I'm going to say I want to open up a file. Now the photo I want to open is actually on my camera roll. So it's just a shot I took with my iPhone. So I can go to Photos, go to Recent, and scroll up. Here's some photos I took at the lake. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of these like that one and import that photo in. So I got some nice portrait mode with my iPhone 11 Pro. Looks cool. But now I get to take advantage of some cool things I can do on the iPad for the first time. So first and foremost, one of my favorite selection tools on Photoshop is the new object selection tool. So I want to select that. Here's what I want to do. I want to select just the pink part of this tree. That's actually a flower blooming off a tree. And I want to separate that onto its own layer. Again, the kind of stuff you just couldn't do in Lightroom if you wanted to. All right, so let's do that first. So I'm going to go to I don't want to use the lasso, but the tool I need is buried underneath the lasso. And there's my object select tool, which is my second one. Now, when I'm in the object select tool, I get to choose whether or not I want to use it as a rectangle or whether or not I want to use it as a lasso. In this case, I just want to use it as a lasso because I think it'd be easier to use. All right, so now that it's as a lasso, I'm just going to go ahead and manually just work my way around, carefully, painstakingly, perfectly around this flower. And of course, none of that is true. I'm like haphazardly working my way around this flower in a way that is not precise at all. Just kind of like giving it an idea. That's the thing I want you to select. When I let go, it actually says, oh, you want this, and makes that selection. So now that it's done that, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to copy that layer. And then I'm going to create a new layer over here on the right-hand side in Photoshop, new layer. And then I'll just go ahead and paste that onto it. So now we've got, if we go here, that's what it just pasted. And that's cool. That's all I needed. I just needed that as a separate object onto a layer. Because what I want to do is I want to sandwich something, a person actually, in between those two layers. The shrink wrap selection tool. That's a good way to look at it. And Photoshop is just reminding me, by the way, that it's saving my work in the background. So there's no save. It just does it. So it's saving my work in the background, saving it as a cloud document. So if I needed to work on this in Photoshop on the desktop, I just go to File, Open, Cloud Documents, and this layered file would be here. Okay, so next, we're going to go back to the background layer. That's the top layer, background layer. And we're going to go ahead and do the image menu where we're going to import another image. Again, something Lightroom just doesn't do. It doesn't work with layered files. So I'm going to import another image. And this time, instead of getting it from my photos, from my files, from my card reader, from any of that stuff, I'm actually going to get it from my Creative Cloud libraries. So if I go to libraries, I've got a library called compositing. So if I tap on compositing and not grouped, there's the woman that I want to bring in. This is a stock photo. I'm just going to go ahead and bring this person in. Yep, I know. Don't ask me again. Flattened. It's just letting me know that this is not really linked to the library. So if you go back and make changes on the library, they're not going to be updated here. So now that I've got this in place, I can move her around, and you can see she's in between the flower now. That's what I was kind of going for. But she has no legs and feet visible in the photo. So we're going to need to kind of hide that grassy part or that leafy part down there, because we're going to remove this background and she won't have any legs to show if we remove all the leaves. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring her down just a bit more. Now, because she's not the same proportion as the rest of the photo, we kind of need to make her bigger. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this upper right corner handle and just make her a lot bigger, kind of like the size she would be if she were really standing there. Bring her down a little bit more, make her a little bit bigger. And I can make her bigger after the fact, but I don't want to take the background off the canvas. All right, so now we've got that in place, and I'm going to bring it down just a little bit more, just to have a little bit of safety. There we go. Okay, so now we got that in place. I can go ahead and say that I'm done sizing that now. I'm done placing that image. I'm done with my library. Now let's go ahead and do the one of my second favorite features is besides the object select tool, we also have select subject. So the Adobe Sensei powered select subject has made its way onto the iPad as well. So if I hold down on my selection tools, you notice that there's a select subject button right at the bottom. So I just go ahead and tap select subject. Photoshop figures out, oh, you're talking about this person here? I'm assuming that's the subject, and it assumed correctly. But select subject has always had a problem from day one, is that it knew nothing about hair. It knew nothing about fur. It knew nothing about, hair or fur. So it would not select the hair in a good way. And it didn't in this case either. Now, on the desktop, we've advanced that quite a bit. We have a new portrait algorithm in Select Subject that selects hair just pretty darn perfectly. But that hasn't made its way over to the iPad yet. So the iPad's like one step behind. So it's got Select Subject now, the one that you knew before June, which is great. But it did bring over in June something we did need before the new Portrait Select Subject, and that is Refine Edge. So Refine Edge, brand new as of the June update. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap the More icon at the bottom, and then I get Refine Edge at the top. So that gives me the ability to cut out hair, fur, anything that Select Subject doesn't do a good job on. So now that I got Refine Edge, I don't want to see it marching ants. That doesn't help me. So I'm going to go up to where it says marching ants, and I'm going to say, show it to me as an overlay. Now I can see where my problems are. I can see that sky still in my image, because all the red is what would be cut out. The gray, that sky is there, and that's the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab my Refine Edge tool, which is, I'm already in it. Just make my brush bigger. Not huge, but bigger. And then we'll just start brushing from the background in. And it will start removing that background from her hair. So Refine Edge made its way onto the iPad, and get this little hair that's hanging down her back. And I think there was some like leaves still over here. Let's get all that off her leg. And let's brush a little bit more over here. And now we got it. So now I can actually, before I let go, I can see it on black. Actually, I don't want to see it on black. I see black and white. There we go. I can see the mask. So I can see, I'm kind of messing up down here a little bit. So I may need to do a little bit more work there, but we'll do that after the fact. All right, so now, and by the way, let me just undo that brushing. There we go. That's another way to deal with it. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to look at an overlay. There we go. And now that before I tell it I'm done, I want to output this as a new layer with a mask, just like I would on a desktop. I want to use the decontaminate colors, which takes if there were any colors from her original background reflecting onto her, it kind of helps remove that. I want to also just use Smart Radius, a little bit of that, just so it helps with the harder edges and the softer edges too. And I can even use a little bit of Shift Edge, which brings your selection in just a hair, so that in case you missed a spot, it would help eliminate that spot. Okay, so now I can go ahead and just hit done, and there she is. So it made a new layer. It turned off the old layer. The old layer is still there. It's just turned off, just like it does on the desktop. But it made this new layer with a mask. And you can always go back and edit that mask and continue working just like you do on the desktop. All right, so now that I've got her in place where I want her to be, I'm going to go ahead and just make her a little bigger, because again, I think she's still too small. So let's go ahead and grab the transform tool, and let's just go ahead and transfer her up a little bit more. There she goes. That's a little bit more realistic for my taste. And we can also use the move tool and just move her. there's her tree legs. You can move her down just a little bit more and behind that flower just a little bit, like so. There we go. And of course, I can add text to this if I needed to. By the way, I can pull her all the way back here if I need to, because again, that flower is on its own layer. So creating layered files, just like you would on a desktop, here in Lightroom here in Photoshop on mobile. So Lightroom's available on iOS and Android, and of course, Mac and Windows. Photoshop, unfortunately, for people on other platforms, is only available on the iPad at this point. So not on the iPhone, not on Android. Of course, it's still on Mac and Windows, but it's an iPad-only app at this point in terms of apps. And of course, if you have a Creative Cloud plan that has Photoshop on the iPad is included. So you don't have to pay extra for it to be able to use it on your iPad. All right. One more thing. So the lighting can obviously be different between your shots, depending on which ones, depending on the lighting conditions from your background versus your foreground. So one of the other things that you can do to help this out is a new adjustment layer in Photoshop on the iPad. One of the most requested features for the iPad. I think this is why the team did it so quickly after the launch. Was people really, really, really wanted curves. I'm not a curves guy. I'll admit it. I know it's sacrilegious. I'm not a curves guy. I'm a camera raw guy. Camera raw filter lets me do everything I would do in curves. But there are people that live and die by curves, and they needed it on the iPad. So it's here. So I've got the woman layer selected. I'm going to go ahead and go to my menu here, and I'm going to add a clipped adjustment. And now curves is one of the choices. So we have brightness and contrast, black and white. All of these are non-destructive adjustments. Color balance, exposure, hue saturation, levels, and vibrance, but curves is now a choice. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just tap on curves. Also, curves has a new interface. This is across both mobile and desktop. It's just a cleaner interface. Curves has been around for decades. So they're starting to clean up that interface. So it's showing me a histogram of where all my data is. And the lower left corner is the shadows. The upper right corner is the highlights. I can work in RGB. I can work in any mode I want. I can draw. I can just tap. I can pick up the plot a point and pick it up, and it will make that adjustment, bring it down. And I can slide it along the curve path and kind of get this adjusted where I want. So I can also say, well, that point's adjusting my shadows where I want. I can add a new point and adjust the highlights where I want and get a nice blend of tone that kind of helps me match that background. So adding a curves clipped adjustment is one tap away now in Photoshop. All right, so I can hide my my adjustments. I can swipe or pinch out to show the layers themselves. I can double tap just like I do on the desktop, and I can call this the flower layer, because after a while you're going to stop remembering which layer is which. I can call this the woman, and I can call this the background, or the lake. Let's call that the lake. All right, so now we've got all those layers named. And we can swipe back down, pinch down to just consolidate the look and feel of the layers. And again, I can just keep adding more, keep doing more, just like I would with Photoshop on the desktop. So no limit on the number of layers, no limit on what I can do with those layers in terms of the features that are here. If I wanted to add text to this, I could. I can just work like I normally would in Photoshop. Now, again, we started this from scratch, so this one is not in Lightroom. But I could share it. I can export it out and bring it into Lightroom that way. And of course, if I just go back to the home, it is now syncing that to my cloud documents. And so therefore, I would be able to open that up in Photoshop on any device. Photoshop on my Mac, my PC, or another iPad, and continue working. All the layers would be there. Okay, so now let's go back to Lightroom for a second, because there are those two shots that I added from my phone have made their way over. Although this one there it is. Hadn't rendered yet, but there it is. And so those are the two raw files I brought in with the Lightning camera adapter from Apple. So just to show that even though I brought them in on Lightroom on my phone, they're here available to me on my iPad, and of course on my desktop as well. So if I wanted to do anything with these photos, I could, just like I did before. So if I wanted to go in and say that I want to do an auto tone on that, and I kind of don't like that little trail coming down from the right-hand side of that little short hill, I won't call it a mountain, then once again, I could say, you know what? It's easy for me to remove that in Photoshop. Let me head over to Photoshop. I see two things I want to do. So opening it up in Photoshop, converting it to a PSD from the raw file. So it's making a copy. I don't have to worry about that. Here it is. And so this is, again, one of those things that would be not possible to do in Lightroom. I decide that I want to create a new layer. I want to use my, by the way, I'm just doing this on the fly. I want to use my clone stamp tool. I want to sample current and below or all layers, same thing. And now that I've done that, I'm going to use my touch modifier to sample from. So I want to sample from that cloud, and I'm going to make my brush a little bigger. And then we'll put another one of those clouds over here. Didn't make my brush big enough. Let's undo that.